is available at our website, www.cgr.org. Today's webinar is about establishing a process for efficiency efforts, one that maximizes your potential for success, whether your initiative focuses on consolidation, shared services, service optimization, or another effort along the continuum of efficiency improvements. Before I introduce our speakers from CGR and GovWorks, I'll briefly overview these strategic partners. The focus they have is delivering integrated, cutting-edge management guidance and solutions to governments, schools, and community institutions. First, CGR. It's a 98-year-old government, it's a 98-year-old management government, CGR is a 98-year-old management consultancy. It's headquartered in Rochester, New York, and is also an industry leader on issues of local government administration, service delivery, efficiency, shared services, and consolidation. GovWorks is based in New Jersey. It includes two of the principals in the historic 2013 consolidation of the two local governments in Princeton, New Jersey, one of the most significant mergers in the U.S. in decades. We have four speakers today. Let me introduce them. They are from our newly announced GovWorks and CGR partnership. Chad Gerner, first, is a GovWorks principal and former mayor, in fact, the last pre-consolidation mayor of Princeton Township, New Jersey. His colleague, Dr. Anton Lanston, is a GovWorks principal and former chair of the study commission that fashioned Princeton's historic shared services and consolidation plan. Third is Dr. Joseph Stefko. He is CGR's president and chief executive officer. He has spent nearly 20 years researching, consulting, and putting into practice municipal efficiency solutions with local governments across the Northeast. And those solutions range from service optimization to shared services and even consolidation. Our fourth speaker is Scott Zittig. He is Associate Director at CGR, where his focus is government management issues, shared services, and local government efficiency. We have a three-point agenda. We expect it to take roughly 45 minutes. First, we want to address why process is essential to the success of any municipal efficiency effort. Next, we want to explore the range of options available to local governments as they face the imperative to do more with less. And third, we want to review the steps to make any efficiency effort productive and position stakeholders to make informed decisions. We do have one housekeeping note. You can ask questions throughout the presentation via the question box on your screen. If you cannot access that question box, you can email me directly at bbrown@cgr.org. We'll be accepting your questions throughout the session and even after the session if you have them and we haven't had a chance to answer them. We will wait to actually answer your questions until the end of today's presentation, and then we'll direct them to the presenter that will be most appropriate to answer. Thank you again for joining us. At this time, I want to turn to CGR's President and CEO, Joseph Stefko. Joe, can you help us put the issues we'll be discussing today in perspective? What is driving the pressure of municipalities and school districts, and what are leaders facing?
Thanks, Vicki, and let me echo your welcome. It's great to have so many local leaders with us to discuss these critical issues. And how critical are they? Well, I think this slide on how local government finances really have been hammered since just before and certainly since the onset of the recession tells a pretty stark story that in the local sense probably won't surprise anyone on the line, but its magnitude nationally may. The experience of the past 5 years has called into question so much of what the local public sector does, how it does it, and how much it costs. And no doubt communities across the country are dealing with that fallout today. For nearly 100 years, our organization, CGR, has been working with local government, school districts, and community institutions on these issues of efficiency and effectiveness, shared services, and even consolidation, on everything from public safety to education to administration and general service delivery. And we know from that experience that your roles as local leaders, which have never been easy, have grown even more difficult in the past 5 years. Local leaders are facing more challenging fiscal conditions than ever before, and reinforcing one of those great truisms of the public sector, the demand for local governments and school districts to provide more, better, and broader services has continued to grow exponentially, notwithstanding the fiscal challenges. So here leaders find themselves, whether they are elected officials, managers, community leaders, trying to balance, enhance, and sustain, while at the same time protecting their financial integrity. So we believe that today's discussion will be helpful in setting some guideposts for you and your community as you move your own efficiency efforts forward. I do want to make a couple of quick points at the outset. First of all, the presenters today, in addition to being involved in similar efficiency efforts in other communities, were all principals in the historic 2013 merger of the two municipalities in Princeton, New Jersey, as Vicki pointed out. And that was the state's largest in more than 60 years, and frankly an effort which is already producing millions in recurring savings. But I want to stress that while today's discussion is informed by that experience, the discussion is not about consolidation per se. There is a continuum of efficiency options available to local government leaders. That continuum is broad, and while it certainly includes consolidation, consolidation is only one point along that range. So whether you're looking at a range of options to optimize service delivery and gain efficiencies within a single government, or to do the same across multiple governments, we believe that the process imperatives that we cover today can help position any effort for greater success. And secondly, I think it's important to note that we recognize there's no one right approach for every community. You know, we've worked with literally hundreds of communities on this full range of options, and we just completed an internal efficiency review for one municipality in New Jersey that looked at its own operations. We are working on a multitude of shared service projects between and among local governments in Ohio and New York and Massachusetts and other places. And of course, we work to help develop consolidation plans in places like Princeton. But the options are informed by each community differently. I think that's critically important. Fiscal stress, appetite for change, existing cooperation, and so on. So we invite you during the course of this presentation to view your own community through the lens of these process lessons, and hopefully to think about how you can better position your own local governments, be it a general purpose municipality, a school district, or another community institution, to have more successful and productive efficiency efforts. So let me turn it back over to Vicki.
Thanks, Joe. I actually want to move pretty quickly to Chad Gerner from GovWorks. He's going to start us through our agenda. And the first question I have, Chad, is how can we leverage the Princeton experience so that other communities learn how to optimize their own efficiency efforts?
Thanks, Vicki. It's great to be here today on the webinar with everybody. You know, it's similar to what Joe had mentioned. You know, the experience and success that we had in Princeton offers a template that can be applied to similar efforts in areas of government efficiency, shared services, and, of course, municipal consolidation. And today's call allows us to share some of our experiences, and hopefully will give other communities the tools necessary to get started down their own path, whatever direction they want to go in. As some of you may know, consolidation in the Princetons wasn't a new topic for us as two separate communities. It was an issue that was evolving with a myriad of studies that occurred over 5 decades. Previously, all of them had failed. But before we started to look at this in 2010, we went back and researched why those efforts had failed and would aim to use those failures to devise a process that would give us the highest probability of success. And that process that we're going to talk about today can be applied to any of these efficiency efforts. And for us, when all was said and done, we were able to consolidate Princeton Borough and Princeton Township, New Jersey, with a successful voter referendum resulting in savings in excess of $3.2 million annually at full implementation. We actually expect that to be greater based on where we stand today. I just want to stress that today's call, as Joe had mentioned, isn't as much about what happened in Princeton as it is more about the process that was utilized and how this process can be applied to your own communities across the entire expanded toolkit. And Joe touched on several of those items, and really there's 3 key areas in that toolkit. One is service optimization, the other is shared services, and what we opted for, which was municipal consolidation. And before I get into the steps and kick that off, let me just define the opportunities that this process would apply to. And first one is service optimization that you see in front of you, and that one is seeking internal efficiencies in your organization while improving services within and typically across departments. Shared services, which is really kind of that next step, can be formal or informal, and it's essentially a functional consolidation of a particular department, such as police, court, public works, sewer, water, etc. And CGR has a significant amount of experience in those areas. Consolidation involves a full merger of two or more governments in an effort to streamline administration, governance, and service delivery. And this is the path that Princeton took because we felt, after looking at all those other options that I just covered, that consolidation made the most sense for us. So let me begin by talking about the process steps that we are all here to hear about today. And the first one is really taking a step back and understanding your community and the various different perspectives that various stakeholders have in your community. Every community has a different starting point, and it's important to kind of examine what has brought you or your organization to the point of considering these various different options. And some of it is obviously fiscal pressures. Many of us are experiencing it. We certainly experienced it in Princeton, and the willingness to change in your community is also an important barometer, because it's important that there are enough supporters to kind of initiate some type of effort. And for Princeton, it was a combination of the fiscal concerns and the desire to really improve the efficiency of governance and develop a more sustainable budget moving forward, and remove some of the budget and staffing woes. The role of government is also very important. One of the biggest obstacles today to any shared service or consolidation effort is actually elected officials. And it's really important that, if you're an elected official on the line, that you bring an open mind to this process and encourage your colleagues to do the same. It's important to begin this process without any preconceived notions and to really approach it with an open mind. Because we found that through our study process that by having an open mind and being objective to the best of our abilities, we were able to find solutions that truly benefited both communities. The third area is really engaging the public and understanding not only the public's desire, because there is always a fear of change, and that there could be some initial concerns, but it's about being clear and transparent, and also garnering the public's trust, because that legitimizes the process, gets you off to a good start, and hopefully will allow you to achieve success. And finally, I just wanted to touch on understanding the past. It's important to know in your community what's been done in the past. Have you ever looked at sharing services, consolidation, or optimizing your service delivery? I'm sure many of us have that are on the call today. But it's important to know from that what went wrong, what can be learned from that, and how can you apply that to a new effort to make it successful. And we'll talk more about that as we go through this. In Princeton, we realized that partly due to the older state law, elected officials were never part of our study commissions. And we didn't have an independent consultant to look at things objectively in previous efforts, and that also contributed to their failure. And we also never had a true campaign committee to get people out to vote for the referendums, and that also contributed to the failure. So by understanding the past and what went wrong, we were able to put a process together this time around that helped us achieve success. So for the next step, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Anton Lanston, who chaired our Consolidation Commission. Anton?
Thanks, Chad. Let's look at step 2 in this process. And what we're talking about here is establishing standard operating procedures for the commission or the committee. And first, it's critical. It is of critical importance to have an objective commission excuse me, or a steering committee whose members are really committed to guiding the effort. Secondly, we believe that the commission membership needs a specific representation. What is the right balance between elected officials and members of the public, and why? So we believe that, and we practice this, I believe, as well, they need for a combination of elected officials for their expertise and their experience, and members of the public for their special expertise, which we had, and to build trust in the process in the community.
Anton, can I interject a question here for you?
Sure.
This is Vicki. Can you tell us a little bit about the makeup of the commission in Princeton and whether you had subcommittees?
Sure. The commission in Princeton had 10 members plus 1 alternate. The borough had 5 members. 2 of the members were elected officials. 3 of them were from the public, selected from the public. In the township, we had the same makeup, 2 elected officials, as well as 3 members from the public. We were fortunate to have the mayor of the Princeton borough and the mayor of the Princeton Township as well on the commission. So we had 10 members of the commission plus 1 alternate. The commission decided to set up 5 subcommittees, and the subcommittees were made up of, all of the subcommittees were made up of members from the commission itself. So each member of the commission was serving on at least 1 subcommittee, and many served on 2 or 3. As chair, I actually represented the commission on all of the subcommittees. We had 5 subcommittees, and they were the following. We had finance, we had governance, a subcommittee focused strictly on governance, police, public works, and the 5th is community engagement. Our underpinning for all of the work was the community engagement subcommittee. So that was the makeup of the commission or committee, and all of the subcommittees as well. And each subcommittee had 4 or 5 members. We also established standard operating principles and procedures. They're very important. We established an agreed upon process for how decisions will be made at each point of the process. For example, one of the questions was, what constitutes a quorum? We also established rules of the road for discussion in the commission meetings. We wanted to ensure that all members of the commission were being heard, and that the process is additive as it goes along. One of the most important operating principles, in my view, in Princeton was to use past experience, and Chad has already referred to this, to use past experience, but don't be trapped by it or limited by it. It's very easy to fall into that. And we ask people really to think from the future, and we know that that's not easy. We also had ground rules dealing with things like listening generously or authentically to one another during meetings and subcommittee meetings. I also was fortunate as chairman to be granted permission for the chair to move on, to be able to intercept debate or discussions and be able to move on, and that was necessary because of tight time constraints. The other part of this was really, and Chad has already alluded to this as well, establishing the public's trust. The commission members are the public's representatives, and it's essential to bring the community along in the process right from the outset and don't wait. I want to repeat that. Bring the community on right from the outset. Don't wait until things are beginning to be formulated. And the commission must establish a tone or a process for ensuring that there is a two-way flow of information throughout the process, not just at the end once the decisions have been made, but build legitimacy with the public throughout. I also want to say that we need to reinforce the independence of the commission to build legitimacy. We recognize the Commission's role is to study, to analyze, and recommend. It is not to implement. And we often had discussions, well, how are we going to implement that? And that discussion would often close down our study or analysis, and we felt we really needed to be careful about that. So the Commission must objectively vet options, which Joe is going to talk about a little bit in a while here, and inform the broader community of those recommendations. Thank you.
Anton, thanks. You just raised a couple of good points that I'd like, Chad, if you'll elaborate on them. There are two elements that were critical to the success in Princeton that keep coming up. Public engagement is the first, and the second is structuring an objective, deliberate study process with an outside consultant. Can you explain why they are both so critical to a successful outcome?
Sure. You know, and that really leads us to step 3, which is about being clear and transparent with any committee, commission, or study group that your community would start out with. You know, a clear and transparent process, you know, through active public engagement serves 2 key roles. First, it catalyzes public education and helps the public understand what the options mean, whether they involve service optimization, shared services, or consolidation. It allows people to voice their concerns, it allows people to contribute ideas, and it certainly helps build public trust. Our commission took a very active approach to this, as we've been talking about from the beginning. You know, our public engagement process was continual throughout the entire study process. We engaged the public through public meetings and through stakeholder and community and neighborhood meetings at the start, middle, and end of our work. Each engagement had a different goal because we were at different points in our timeline, but nonetheless, each effort was valuable in ensuring success. In the beginning of the process, it was really about listening to concerns or ideas. At the end of the process, it was more about explaining how we arrived at a particular recommendation. And all of those things contributed to a better understanding and really, I think, drove our success. I can't stress enough the importance of public meetings. In Princeton, we held public meetings in people's homes and in public forums. And Anton talked about subcommittees. We had a subcommittee that was focused on community engagement, and that subcommittee ended up holding over 70 meetings with the public from the beginning to the end of our work through neighborhood and stakeholder meetings. So that for us, I believe, was a really key driver in getting the public on board with what we were doing and crystallizing support for what we were doing. The other important aspect of this in terms of being clear and transparent was the role of the independent consultant. And if you remember when I was talking before at the previous failed efforts in the Princetons, one of them was because we never had a truly objective third party analyze the financial data and service delivery data for our communities. And every time that a commission is formed, there's always, you know, some kind of preconceived or perceptions that could be brought to the members of the commission. But by having a consultant at the table that is kind of a disinterested third party, it allows the commission to really accept the data and be able to look at it from a clear lens. And I think for us that was really, really critical. And the other thing that a consultant does is they're very process-driven, and that allows you to focus on the timeline that you have in order to achieve a certain objective. And you know, I would really sum up their role as analytical, independent, and process-driven, and those are all critical components that can't necessarily be filled by a commission alone.
Thanks, Chad. So far, you and our other presenters have really talked about that process infrastructure that needs to be in place. But now it's time to let's really talk about the efficiency study process that lets you identify, analyze, and inform the community's consideration of options. I'm going to ask Scott Siddick. He's done dozens of these studies for CGR to share some perspective on what the study process actually looks like.
Thanks, Vicki. I'd be happy to do that. You know, as the independent study consultant, we've certainly had the opportunity to refine and design these processes numerous times to try and promote the best outcome in each case. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about a credible and thorough study process, which we've termed here Step 4. In nearly every community that I've worked with, in fact, every key stakeholder in them has had some preconceived notion about what shared services or consolidation would mean in their community. Some, if not most, see it as a guaranteed savings windfall, a no-brainer. That's how the conversation often starts anyway. Others see it as the devil we don't know, bringing potential negative impacts on services, taxes, competitiveness, home values, you name it. Still others aren't engaged in the issue at all. They're focused on taking the kids to soccer games, lacrosse games, attending PTA meetings, just barely meeting the demands of life. The study process is essential for reaching out and engaging those in two distinct groups, those who have already made up their minds in order that we can test those preconceived notions against empirical data, assessing what impact a particular efficiency effort might actually have. For the other group, those not yet engaged, the study process provides a mechanism for engaging them with factual information, not propaganda, to ensure that when a decision is finally made, it's the most informed decision possible regarding the community's future. You know, at CGR, we typically structure our study processes on these types of efforts, as we did in Princeton, with two overarching phases. Our first goal is to develop a thorough understanding of what exists. The team in Princeton came to refer to it as a baseline analysis, and it is the initial study of who does what and what it costs. It's that essential first step in the process of evaluating how resources are allocated, how services are delivered, how the organization is structured, and so on. It really has a multifold purpose. First, it provides a shared knowledge foundation for the community to work off of, establishing common facts about what exists. And second, especially in efficiency efforts involving multiple municipalities, this is the community's first chance to see the separate operations in the same context and identify similarities and differences. And third, the baseline analysis becomes the foundation on which options can be developed and analyzed. The second phase is the options analysis. And the options analysis builds on the baseline analysis to identify potential efficiency improvements. Improvements that can drive cost savings, better operations, or best of both worlds, both. To accomplish this, the options analysis necessarily takes a more critical look at current systems than the baseline analysis does. And in most of our efficiency projects, it results in a range of alternatives to the status quo, which, of course, is itself an option. And then the actual analysis considers the impacts of each alternative versus the status quo. Service levels, processes, staffing requirements, saving levels, etc. And bearing in mind that this analysis is intended to inform a community dialogue, the entire range of options is presented, not just one. This allows the public and all stakeholders to fully understand the analytical process and inform their own decision on what options make the most sense. It also, of course, builds legitimacy that the effort isn't a fait accompli.
Thanks, Scott. I'd like to know for everyone on the line that you can find examples of each of the studies Scott just talked about, baseline, options, recommendations, from Princeton on the Princeton Commission website, which you'll find at www.cgr.org/Princeton. And so now that we've got the study process complete and a recommendation formed, we're now at the fifth and final step in the process, and that's the community campaign for that and actual perspective on how it really played out in Princeton. Let me go back to Anton and Chad.
Great, thanks, Vicki. I'll start here by briefly looking at the community campaign, which has really two parts. Once the recommendation is made or established, and especially if it requires a public referendum a community campaign, at least that's what we call it, a community campaign is necessary. And there are two parts to this. One is the information sessions that are convened or conducted by the commission, and the second is the citizens campaign group. And I'm just going to take a moment here to talk briefly about the commission's responsibility. The work of the commission does not stop with making its recommendation. It really continues with diligence focused on information for the public and a public dialogue and advocacy for the recommendation. The commission, during the period of time after it makes its recommendation and before a referendum is held, which is usually, or in our case, let's say, it was about 3 months, it is during that period that the commission is very active in providing information and running information sessions for the public. That's part one. Part two, Chad?
Thanks, Antonio. Part two was actually the formation of a citizens campaign committee. And this committee was separate from the commission. And it existed to have a true champion to catalyze the community's interest in terms of understanding the recommendation that the commission had made and to counteract the spreading of any misinformation. And that's very important. But the campaign committee itself also focused specifically on voter outreach, identifying voters. They held voter information tables at supermarkets, at various different events. They knocked on doors. They coordinated letters to the editor. And they also did mass mailings. Essentially, they ran a campaign for the referendum. And it was important to have them in place because the commission, just by nature of the way it was formed and their nature to be objective, they could not engage in this level of campaign outreach. The other thing that was important for the campaign committee to do, and this is important in any effort, whether there's a referendum or not, is to really be able to have a rapid response system to address any information gaps where the public isn't understanding the particular aspect, or to stop the spread of any misinformation. That's really critical because those types of misinformation can potentially snowball and derail any effort. And that did happen in the past in the Princetons, and we wanted to make sure that this didn't happen this time. And that's why we formed a community campaign committee. And it was really critical to the effort in getting out the vote. And in the end, for those of you that aren't aware, it passed in Princeton Borough by 61% of the vote, and in the township it passed by 85% of the vote. And I believe the campaign committee contributed heavily to that.
Chad, thanks. I'd like to move now to some of the questions that have come in from participants and encourage you to keep sending them in. But before I do that, Joe, can you quickly summarize the 5 steps we've discussed already?
Sure, Vicki, thanks. Briefly, first of all, understanding your community. Again, every community comes at the efficiency issue from a different starting point, even if we have common challenges. So there's simply no substitute for understanding the community's appetite for change, the level of urgency, and maybe most importantly, what's driving the efficiency effort. Secondly, establishing standard operating procedures, encouraging an oversight committee that can operate independently and objectively and productively as the community's representative and as the overall driver of the process. Thirdly, implementing a transparent process. Simply no substitute for this, to engage, to educate the public and other key stakeholders. Fourth, to conduct a clear and thorough study of the alternatives, to compare them to the status quo, and inform the decisions that the commission, elected officials, and ultimately residents and stakeholders in the community are going to need to make on their community's future. And fifth and finally, ensuring an active, fact-based community dialogue or citizens campaign. So before turning this back over to you, Vicki, to moderate the Q&A, let me just quickly reiterate something I noted at the outset of the webinar. These steps are not just about consolidation, nor are they just about efforts or initiatives that span multiple local governments or school districts. We think that they're applicable to all efforts along the efficiency continuum, be they within a single government or initiatives that transcend multiple governments. It's not just about service optimization or shared services or consolidation. That effective process infrastructure and targeted objective analysis can really inform all of these critical decisions on communities and their respective futures.
Joe, thanks. Now we're ready to turn to the questions that have been coming in from all of you who are listening today. And before we do, I just want to say that we are going to hold to making sure we are within the 1 hour time frame that you have allotted for this webinar. And if we have questions that we haven't answered, we're going to make sure that we respond to all of you, provide a document within the coming days that answers all of those questions and give you all answers to them. And along with that, we will be providing today's PowerPoint presentation. So let me take the first question, and a number of people have asked it. How long, Joe, does the study process typically take, and why?
Well, I think it's different depending on the community and the complexity of their budget, their service delivery menu, and the issues that they're interested in looking at. Typically it can take a kind of a 6 to 9 month time frame. I believe in Princeton there was probably 9 to 10 months worth of study, which informed the Commission's eventual recommendations, and then the community's consideration, ultimately the referendum followed that. But in most of the, be they internal efficiency studies or intermunicipal shared service or consolidation studies with which we've been involved, 6 to 9, occasionally 12 months is about the average length of time.
Thanks, Joe. Another question is, first, this one I'm going to send to you, Scott. Is the study process the same for schools as it would be for, say, police or fire or municipalities?
I think in general the fundamentals, the principles of the study process transcend the subject matter. So I think the short answer to that question is yes. The 5 steps ensure consistency, transparency, accuracy, empowerment of those who are making the decisions. And I think the process also, leaves open the possibility of many different outcomes. There's no way to ensure any particular outcome. So that's the whole point, is you want people to be informed to make their best decisions. So I think with all the given subject matter, there's a possibility there that there are certain requirements that maybe are involved in some of these different subject matters. Schools might have a different process that they require, process element. But I think these principles that we've outlined here transcend the subject matter. So I think the short answer to the question, which I've just turned into a long one, is yes. They certainly transcend the subject matter.
No problem. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. Chad, this is a question that's just come in, and it's one that I think is useful for a lot of people, and that is, can you share some successful internal efficiencies and best practices that a community can implement itself? And Chad, you can talk about what was done in Princeton. Successful internal efficiencies and best practices that a community can implement itself.
Well, as far as internal best practices in terms of identifying departmental savings, one of the things that we found is that our 2 biggest departments were not currently shared between the 2 communities. And for those of you that don't know much about Princeton Borough and Princeton Township, we shared 13 shared services before we ended up consolidating at the voter referendum in 2011. And our 2 outstanding ones were police and public works. And our police consolidation, our analysis of that makes up about $2.1 million of the $3.2 million identified savings that the Commission had identified during the study process. So, internal efficiencies from combining those departments was pretty significant. And, I think that every single case is going to be different. And if you're really looking just solely at your municipality or your particular organization and trying to find internal efficiencies there's various different ways that you could go about that in terms of sharing, various different personnel across departments and things like that. I mean, there's a lot of different ways in which you can go about that, but I think each case is different.
But Joe, let me see if we've talked in terms of Princeton for that answer, but Joe, let me throw it to you for a little bit broader response.
Yeah, thanks for the question, David. I think this is an important one that gets at a critical point. I mean, Chad, of course, is talking about the interrelationship between two municipalities. Of course, we routinely see municipalities that approach us or on their own are looking for internal efficiencies, best practices, things that they can do on their own. And the way that we as a team typically approach that is to look at internal operations for one entity, be it a school district, a town, a county, a city, a borough, whatever, from a couple of different levels. The first is on the department-by-department level. What are the departments doing? To what extent is workload synchronized with the allocation of staff and, in some cases, capital resources? So looking at those departments almost as entities unto themselves, and then using that information to pull back to a 15 or 20,000 foot level and look at those departments as components of the whole and begin to identify where there are either functional, substantive, or process synergies between and among departments. So in my initial comments, I alluded to a project that CGR recently completed, an efficiency study looking just internally at one New Jersey municipality. And in addition to identifying a series of department-by-department efficiencies, we also identified some of the processes that touch multiple departments. Cash receipting process is one example. As we pulled back and looked at all 13 or 14 departments, functional areas across this municipality, we identified not only some potential process efficiencies from streamlining or centralizing the cash receipting process, but there's a kind of a mitigation of potential liability there as we winnow down the number of hands, say, that a tax bill or a court fine or payment to the health department would touch throughout the municipality. So I think that the best course of action I can suggest is, as you think about your own entity, to think about potential efficiencies from those two different perspectives, the department by department and then departments as units of the organizational whole.
Thanks, Joe. Scott, this next question's for you. What problems typically arise during the study process?
Yeah, I think we could probably be here the rest of the afternoon if we wanted to talk about all the problems that we've encountered. But some of the initial problems when you're setting up a study or you're setting up a process, you got to have good data. You got to have access to good data, and to the extent that a community doesn't track things or does not have good data or it's not easily accessible, certainly either slows it down or it's going to it's going to make the process that much more difficult. You think about the group of people that are sitting around the table, the committee group that's working together, and one of the other problems we've seen is when you don't have partners at the if you're thinking about shared services or consolidation, if the two groups are not equally represented, if one group's more representative than the other, and so you're not getting the full buy-in from both municipalities and leadership and the key stakeholders in both communities, I do think that can set the process back. And so one of the things that often gets in the way of the process itself is by not getting that buy-in up front and getting partners to the table that way. Some of the other problems we've seen, the study process honestly can drag on too long. Sometimes you got to keep these things moving, and sometimes you just got to have, information. You got to work through it relatively quickly, not too fast, because you want to make sure you cover all the issues. But you don't want it to drag on too long. You can lose interest. People can lose focus. A couple other things: lack of transparency. Sometimes study committees or key stakeholders want to try to hold the information close to their vest, and bottom line is, as we've said, I think transparency is key. It's essential to getting buy-in from the community and folks to be engaged in that process. So those are some of the issues. I think like I said, we could go on and on with other problems, but I'll stop there.
As all of you know, we could talk about problems for a while, but there's a question that just came in. I'm going to send this one to Joe. Clearly, we've been talking a lot about Princeton, and the participant today who sent this email in says, does New Jersey as a state seem more accepting of consolidation than does, say, New York State?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that look, I think there are some pretty common themes that we see from the communities in New York and New Jersey and, frankly, Massachusetts and Ohio that we've worked with that have come to the shared service or consolidation issue. Whether New Jersey as a state is more, as the questioner asks, accepting of consolidation than New York or maybe other states. I mean, I certainly allow Chad and Anton to respond to that as well. I can say, though, that I think that the level of acceptance, the level of willingness to at least look at whether it's consolidation or other efficiency issues has grown in recent years in New Jersey, in New York, and the other places where we've been working with communities. But I think that, notwithstanding the Princeton consolidation and the fact that that one made it to the finish line, I think it's important to recognize that that was the first significant municipal consolidation in New Jersey in more than half a century. So I think that if you want to call it the success rate of merger efforts actually getting to and over the finish line is roughly the same in New Jersey as it is in other places. That's why I think we see more communities going down the path of shared services, interlocal agreements, internal efficiencies as well. I don't know if Chad or Anton, you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I would just say, Joe, this is Chad. I would just say that, as far as New Jersey being more keen towards consolidation than other states, I think that the same initial objections to looking at shared services or consolidation remain regardless of what state you're in. What we are seeing, though, is a result of what happened in Princeton and the savings that we've realized through the study process and into our first year of a consolidated municipality have certainly triggered conversations in many other communities in the state. And we're talking to a lot of different communities now about potentially getting started with studying the various different options. The key to it, though, is really making sure that there's a study process in place that is formed along the outlines of what we talked about today. In order for something to get started and have any type of degree to success, there has to be a real strong project timeline and a process that drives it through to fruition.
I'm thinking a little bit more about this question. This is Scott talking. I'm thinking, comparing New York and New Jersey, the questioner kind of asked, does New Jersey as a state seem more accepting of consolidation? And just if you're not from New York, you don't know too much about the process that's gone on here. New York's been studying communities in New York have been studying this process for a longer time, I think, than New Jersey in totality. But I think the issue there is we've seen in New York probably 8, 10, 12 communities at a minimum go through the process and actually achieve dissolution, which is called in New York dissolution of villages, consolidation. There's been a lot of shared services. We've conducted dozens and dozens of studies, and I should clarify saying longer. I mean, I know Princeton's been studying the idea of consolidation for 4 to 6 decades, but New York has been putting a push on this over the last 6, 8, 10 years or so, and I think there's been a lot more communities that have actually gone through and successfully dissolved, if you want to call that success. And so I think that kind of gives you a little bit more background on the comparison between New York and New Jersey.
There's a question that's just come in now, and in this one, Chad, I'm going to throw to you. It is, there were real savings in Princeton. How were they passed on to the taxpayers?
What was the last part of that question, Vicki?
How are the savings you achieved in Princeton actually passed on to taxpayers?
That is a good question. This is the first year of a 3-year implementation, and this first year of a consolidated municipal budget has resulted in a tax reduction for all residents of the combined municipality, and that's actually ahead of our schedule. We expected that in the first year we would most likely have a flat budget without any obvious tax increase, but what has happened is our savings actually were greater than anticipated in year 1, and that allowed us to move ahead with a tax reduction.
Okay? We've got a number of questions, but we'll probably won't be able to sum them all up, but we'll get to a couple more here. Anton, this one is for you. What are the most important factors of successful community engagement in a study?
That's a great, I love that question. I think the thing that made such a difference for us was the commission made a commitment right from the outset that we were going to go out into the community and not wait for the community to come to us. And when we hadn't made any decisions other than to hire a consultant, we were going into people's homes. We didn't have anything really to report, but what we were doing, we were gathering information from people in their homes and various organizations, and we really worked hard at continually going into all parts of the community. Princeton, like most other communities, has various sub-communities in it, and reaching out into the community was so essential, so essential. But the second part of that, I would say, was to bring to the community the open perspective that I think we had as we went forward until we had a recommendation. And we were presenting, as Joe had mentioned earlier, options, and the transparency that I think we provided was critical. But the most important thing I would advocate, and would do it again, was, and I guess it was Chad that mentioned, we had over 70 meetings in homes and organizations, etc. We went out into the community. We didn't wait for the community to come to us, although we held several public forums that CGR was involved with, and they were very, very beneficial.
Anton, thanks. I've got time for this last question, Joe. Is there a typical benchmark level of savings that can be produced through consolidation or shared services?
Well, again, I think this very much depends on the community, the scope of the effort. In Princeton, just by way of comparison, as Chad points out, the recurring annualized savings are in excess of $3 million, and that's on a if you combine the two former municipalities' budgets, it was a little over $60 million. So that's about 5% off of the total annual spend of the predecessor governments. The typical range we see is, Princeton would probably be right smack dab in the middle. We're typically in the kind of 3 to 6% range. We have seen instances where savings are below that, where the juice of, say, a consolidation effort, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, so to speak. By the same token, we know we at CGR have worked with communities where savings have pushed, at least on the municipal component of the tax bill, up into the mid to high 20s percentage-wise. So I think that while we can point to a kind of common benchmark range here, the variability across and beyond that range really points back to one of the process steps that we discussed earlier, and that is there frankly really is no substitute to kind of rolling up your sleeves and doing that objective, operational, and financial budgetary analysis to see, if this, then that, and then if that occurs, what's the budgetary impact? And to the point one of our questioners raised, when that actually falls to the tax bill, when that falls to the end user, what's the impact on that average taxpayer in a community?
Thanks, Joe. And thank you all for asking questions, attending, and also to our presenters. Please don't hesitate to keep sending questions to me at bbrown@cgr.org. We will get answers back to you and additional information, and we're happy to discuss the issues with you or any members of your leadership in the future. Our next webinar will be held this fall, and it's going to be on another critical efficiency topic, public safety and public works service efficiency. How do you overcome skepticism and fear of losing control? As you know, many of you know, police, fire, highways, and public works are among local government's biggest cost centers, and revenue-strapped officials are increasingly seeking efficiencies. We'll focus on how to optimize those services and the process for achieving positive change. We hope you'll be able to join us. Please check our website, www.cgr, where where we will be posting information in the coming weeks, and we'll make sure you do also get the information. For all of us at CGR and GovWorks, thank you. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us.